The grand hall of the Galactic Council was silent, a tense quiet that stretched across the room. The flickering lights from the towering holographic screens reflected off the polished floors, casting strange glows on the faces of the delegates. Representatives from the most powerful species in the galaxy sat at the long oval table, eyes fixed on the human delegation. The council had been in session for hours, negotiating a peace treaty that would bring an end to years of conflict. For weeks, the galaxy's greatest minds had worked tirelessly to draft the terms of the agreement. The talks had begun with optimism, with all sides expressing a desire for peace. The human delegation had arrived with high hopes, representing not just their people, but the promise of unity between civilizations long divided. Their leader, Ambassador Lila Carter, had been chosen for her calm demeanor, sharp intelligence, and unyielding belief in diplomacy. She had led humanity through many difficult negotiations, and this moment was supposed to be no different. But something was different. Lila sat at the head of the table, her gaze unwavering. Her fingers rested lightly on the edge of the table as she studied the faces of the alien representatives. Across from her sat the Kresnik, tall, reptilian creatures whose scales shimmered in the light. To her left, the towering Ver, beings of living energy, their forms flickering like holograms. The Ilrak, a species known for their ability to read emotions, stood on the right, their eyes glowing with unnatural intelligence. And scattered around the table were dozens of other species, some humanoid, some not, each with their own agenda, their own fears, their own hopes. They had all come here, to this moment, hoping for peace. But the longer the talks went on, the more it became clear that the negotiations were faltering. Every time the humans presented a concession, the other species asked for more, demanding more resources, more power, more control. The promises of peace seemed less like a solution and more like a ruse to get humanity to bow down to the will of the galaxy's dominant species. Lila's patience, which had once been limitless, was beginning to wear thin. She had been trained for this. She knew how to navigate the complexities of intergalactic diplomacy, how to listen, how to negotiate. But today, something inside her was changing. The humans had been pushed to the brink too many times. They had sacrificed too much for the sake of peace, only to see their own people taken advantage of. The other delegates were speaking now, voices rising in anger, accusing each other of sabotaging the talks. The Ilrak, who were known for their sharp minds and even sharper tempers, were arguing fiercely with the Kresnik. The Ver, usually the calmest of the bunch, seemed unsettled, their energy forms fluctuating wildly as if they, too, could sense the mounting tension. Lila sat quietly, her eyes narrowing as she listened. The time had come. She glanced down at the document in front of her, a treaty filled with promises, compromises, and empty words. She knew it would never work. The terms favored everyone but humanity. The galaxy had come to expect humanity's generosity, but there was no more to give. No more peace to offer. The human race had fought for their survival for far too long. They had proven themselves time and time again, only to be pushed aside. Lila's hand moved slowly, deliberately, to the document. The other delegates were still shouting, arguing over insignificant details, when suddenly, her voice cut through the noise. "I think it's time to make a decision," she said, her tone calm, but carrying an undeniable weight. The room fell silent. Every eye in the room turned to her. The Kresnik's glowing yellow eyes narrowed. The Ver's flickering energy form pulsed uncertainly. The Ilrak's glowing eyes locked onto her with intensity, reading every emotion she was trying to hide. Lila stood up. "The human delegation will not sign this treaty." Gasps echoed throughout the room. The silence that followed was deafening. The Kresnik, who had been standing with clenched fists, took a step forward, their elongated claws scraping against the stone floor. The Ver began to vibrate erratically, their energy form flickering wildly, as though struggling to understand what had just happened. The Ilrak, whose communication was primarily emotional, seemed to pulse with confusion and disbelief. The tension in the room reached a boiling point. The Veer spoke first, their voice a deep, resonant hum that filled the chamber. "You speak as if you hold all the power here, human. But you will regret this." Lila met their gaze. "No, we won't regret it. The galaxy may think that humanity's desire for peace makes us weak, but we've learned something. We will no longer be anyone's stepping stone." The room erupted in chaos. The Kresnik bellowed, their reptilian voices filled with rage. The Ilrak began to exchange rapid, unreadable thoughts, their minds racing in the silence between them. The Veer continued to vibrate in an unstable pattern, sending shockwaves through the air. For a moment, it seemed as though the room would collapse into chaos, but amidst the yelling and confusion, Lila remained calm. Her decision had been made. And now, there was no turning back. "I want peace, but not at the cost of our people's dignity," Lila continued, her voice clear and strong. "If peace means submitting to the will of the powerful, then it is not peace, it is surrender. And humanity will not surrender." The human delegation stood behind her, their faces hard, resolute. The message was clear. They would walk away from these talks. They would not be bullied into submission, and they would not accept a treaty that sacrificed their people's future. Outside the council chamber, the galaxy held its breath. As the human delegation made their way toward the exit, the other delegates stood in stunned silence. They had expected humanity to fold, to give in to the pressure. But now, they were faced with the shocking reality that the humans were leaving peace behind, leaving the galaxy's fragile unity in shambles. The door to the council chamber closed with a heavy thud, cutting off the chaos inside. As the humans walked down the long, empty corridor, the weight of their decision settled upon them. There was no going back. The galaxy would know the consequences of this act soon enough. The news would spread like wildfire. Humanity had just walked away from the peace talks, and the galaxy was about to pay the price. But Lila knew one thing for sure. This was not the end. It was just the beginning. The news of humanity's decision spread like wildfire across the galaxy. What had begun as a quiet moment in the heart of the Galactic Council quickly escalated into a chain reaction that would echo through every star system, every planet, and every corner of the galaxy. The human delegation had walked away from the peace talks. They had refused to sign a treaty that would have placed them at the mercy of the more powerful species, and the consequences of that decision were about to shake the galaxy to its very core. On the planet of Azar, a massive world located in the center of the galaxy, the leaders of the Kresnik, those fierce reptilian creatures, were already meeting in a grand war room. The Kresnik had been the first to respond to humanity's shocking move. They had long viewed humans with suspicion, seeing them as a species that had risen too quickly in the galactic hierarchy. The Kresnik had never fully trusted humanity's intentions, and now they saw the human delegation's withdrawal as an act of defiance. To them, it was an unforgivable insult. "Do you understand what this means?" growled General Jar, the Kresnik military leader, his scaled face twisting with rage. His long claws scraped against the stone table as he leaned forward, glaring at the assembled officers. "The humans have shown their true nature. They will not be controlled." A tall Kresnik commander, his armor gleaming in the dim light, nodded grimly. "The peace treaty was never meant to be fully accepted by them. We only gave them a seat at the table to show them their place. But now, they'd broken the fragile alliance we tried to form." Jar's eyes narrowed as he stood, pacing in front of the table. "This cannot be ignored. We must act quickly to reassert our dominance. The galaxy must understand that there are consequences for defying us." Meanwhile, across the galaxy on the planet Vera, the Veer, those ethereal beings of living energy, were in turmoil. The peaceful beings, known for their serene ways and philosophical nature, had always acted as intermediaries between species. They had worked tirelessly for years to keep peace among the galactic powers, but now they were caught in a whirlwind of confusion. The humans had walked away from the talks, and the once unshakable alliance of the Ver was starting to crack. The Ver's High Council gathered in their floating citadel, their forms flickering in and out of existence like light refracted through water. The council members, each an ancient being who had seen eons of history unfold, were at a loss. Their calming presence, which had once been able to settle the most heated debates, was now filled with uncertainty. "Do we truly understand what has happened?" asked High Elder Ilian, her voice resonating with a quiet hum that echoed through the citadel. "The humans have rejected our offer of peace. The fabric of the galaxy is unraveling, and we stand in the center of it all." One of the younger Ver, a member known as Callan, spoke up, his energy form crackling with anxious energy. "The Kresnik are already preparing for war. They will move quickly. We must act." "But how?" Alien replied. "We have always stood for peace. The humans, they have not broken peace, Callan. They have simply refused to accept a corrupted version of it. What are we supposed to do?" Callan demanded, his form beginning to shimmer more violently. "We can't simply wait for the galaxy to tear itself apart. The humans have shown that they are ready to fight for their place. The Kresnik will not let this go unpunished." Back on Earth, the human leadership was facing its own crisis. The decision to walk away from the peace talks had been calculated, but the ramifications were far-reaching. The media outlets, once allies in spreading the message of peace, now broadcasted the same question over and over again. What would the galaxy's reaction be? Would humanity stand alone, or would they find themselves fighting for survival against powerful galactic forces? In the capital of Earth's Federation, President Sarah Klein stood before the emergency broadcast network, her face a mask of calm determination. She knew the stakes. The human race was no longer just a participant in galactic politics. They were now a target. The decision to leave the talks had made them enemies of the Kresnik, and likely other factions who had been secretly working with them. But she stood firm in her belief that humanity's future was not one where they bowed to the demands of the galaxy's larger powers. "We cannot allow fear to dictate our actions," she said to the gathered leaders of Earth. "This was our decision. We must stand united, ready for whatever comes next." Her words echoed across the planet, and soon the message was being broadcast to every colony, every city, and every human settlement. Earth was not afraid. Earth was not backing down. And for the first time, humans began to realize the weight of their decision. The galaxy was watching them, but now it was their turn to shape their own future. The reaction from the galaxy's other species was swift. Some, like the Illurak, who prided themselves on understanding the emotional core of every species, saw the humans' move as one of immense courage. They were not the aggressors in this conflict, but they would no longer be passive. They had drawn a line in the sand, and the galaxy would have to take notice. Others, like the aggressive Kresnik, saw this as an outright challenge to their authority. They were not interested in peace. They were interested in power. The Kresnik began making overt moves to seize control of key sectors of the galaxy, tightening their grip on trade routes, military bases, and strategic resources. They sent fleets of warships to the Outer Rim, ready to assert dominance in a way that would force the humans and the galaxy to reconsider their actions. On the planet Gathor, a small but influential planet near the edge of the galaxy, the Gathorians, known for their expertise in technology, began to prepare for what they feared would be an all-out war. They had no direct stake in the peace talks, but they understood one thing. When the Kresnik moved, they moved fast. The Gathorians had always stayed neutral, but they knew that if war broke out, they would have to choose sides. And then there were the other species, the neutral parties, the small colonies, and those caught in the middle of this galactic upheaval. Many of them had been watching the talks with quiet hope. They had hoped that peace would bring a new age of prosperity, where resources were shared, where there were no more wars, no more threats from the galaxy's tyrannical powers. But with humanity's sudden withdrawal, that dream now seemed impossible. By now, the galactic news feeds were flooded with analysis and speculation. The once optimistic council meetings had turned into tense, volatile discussions. The great galactic powers were divided, unsure of what would come next. Would the Kresnik act on their threats? Would the Ver intervene, or would they stand aside, hoping that the humans' decision was a miscalculation? Across the stars, every species knew one thing for certain: the galaxy was no longer united. The events set in motion by the humans' bold move were pushing the galaxy towards something inevitable, something that would either break them apart or force them to come together in ways never seen before. For now, all anyone could do was wait for the Kresnik's next move, wait for the Ver to decide their course, and wait for humanity to either be swallowed up by the chaos they had unleashed or rise to become the very thing they had always dreamed of: a power capable of reshaping the galaxy. The galaxy had fallen into chaos, but as the world leaders, alien species, and the citizens of countless planets struggled to make sense of humanity's decision, a more complex web of hidden motives was beginning to unravel in the shadows. While the Kresnik and the Ver were preparing for open conflict, and various species scrambled to secure their positions, there were others who had been quietly watching, waiting for the right moment to act. Far beyond the galactic center, on the forgotten moon of Thaurin, an isolated group of human exiles had gathered in secret. These were not the politicians or the diplomats who represented humanity at the Galactic Council. These were the outcasts, humans who had long been living on the fringes of galactic society, cast aside by the very government they had once served. But they were not forgotten. They had their own plans, their own vision for humanity's future. At the center of this group was Marcus Orloff, a former intelligence officer who had served under the Federation's most covered operations. His reputation had once been one of unquestionable loyalty to the human cause, but his time in the shadows had shown him the flaws of the Federation's methods. Now, he saw humanity's future not in peace, but in the kind of power that would never again be subjected to the whims of alien species. Orloff stood in front of a large, dimly lit holographic map, his fingers tracing the locations of various strategic points across the galaxy. He had been gathering information for years, insider knowledge about the galaxy's most powerful factions, their weaknesses, and their hidden agendas. As humanity's withdrawal from the peace talks sent shockwaves through the galaxy, Orloff's group had been waiting for this moment. It was time for them to reveal their presence. "We've been in the dark for too long," Orloff said, his voice low but filled with authority. "The galaxy thinks we're weak. They think we'll bend to their will. But we will show them a different side of humanity, one that is capable of taking control. The Kresnik want war, and we will give it to them, on our terms." His words hung in the air, heavy with promise. Around him, a dozen others stood, their eyes hard with resolve. These were not simple rebels. They were strategists, military commanders, and former leaders from all over human space, each with their own reasons for believing that humanity needed a new path. They knew that if the Federation wasn't ready to fight for humanity's future, they would take it into their own hands. As Orloff continued to study the holographic map, his second-in-command, Lieutenant Alyssa Kent, stepped forward, her brow furrowed with concern. "Marcus, we've already intercepted several communications. The Kresnik are mobilizing their fleet, and the Ver are getting ready to intervene. If we don't make our move soon, we'll lose the advantage." Orloff glanced at her, his eyes cold. "We won't be making the first move. Let the Kresnik strike first. But when they do, they'll find that humanity is not an easy target." Kent hesitated. "And what about the rest of the galaxy? We have allies, but they're few and far between. What if they turn against us?" Orloff smiled, a hint of satisfaction creeping into his expression. "They will have no choice. The Kresnik will make their move, and it will be their mistake. We'll show them the power of humanity's resolve." While Orloff and his group plotted in secret, the situation in the Galactic Council was growing more tense by the day. The Illurak, always the most emotionally intuitive species, had been trying to understand the deeper reasons behind humanity's decision. They had long respected the humans for their resilience and intelligence, but the events unfolding were beyond anything they had anticipated. The galaxy was on the brink of war, and they feared the repercussions of humanity's defiant stance. High Elder Ilian paced back and forth in the council chamber, her form shimmering in the low light. Her mind was a whirl of thoughts as she communicated silently with the rest of her species. The Illurak had always prided themselves on their ability to read the emotional undercurrents of every situation. And yet this was different. There was something about humanity's actions that did not sit right with her. The humans, Ilian thought, are not simply walking away from peace. They are provoking something much larger. There is more at play here than they are willing to admit. Ilian's concerns grew as she delved deeper into the emotions and actions of the humans. She sensed something in their delegation that was not just defiance, but an underlying, deeply ingrained desire for something more, a deep hunger for power that had long been suppressed. It was this desire that Ilian feared would lead humanity down a dangerous path. She turned to the council, her voice steady but heavy with worry. We must not underestimate the humans. They may appear weak, but they are capable of much more than we've given them credit for. We must be cautious in our approach. While Ilian spoke of caution, the Kresnik were already making their move. General Jar, consumed by rage over humanity's actions, had begun organizing his fleet for an immediate strike. His warships, massive and intimidating, were preparing to launch a surprise attack on the human colonies that bordered Kresnik territory. He had convinced the Kresnik High Command that humanity's rebellion was the beginning of a larger conflict. The humans had dared to defy them, and Jar was determined to make them pay. But Jar had miscalculated. The Kresnik, in their thirst for conquest, had overlooked one crucial detail. Humanity was not alone in this struggle. While the Kresnik prepared for war, an even more dangerous player was quietly positioning itself in the shadows. The Trade Alliance, a collective of powerful corporations and trade guilds that controlled much of the galaxy's wealth. The Trade Alliance had always maintained a delicate balance of power, staying neutral in most conflicts to ensure the flow of resources across the galaxy. However, the events unfolding with humanity's defiant move had disrupted this balance. The Alliance had quietly offered support to the humans, not out of any sense of loyalty, but because they saw an opportunity to regain leverage over the larger galactic powers. The Trade Alliance had long been frustrated by the influence of the Kresnik and Vare, both of whom had used their military and political power to control trade routes and dominate key sectors. Now, with the galaxy on the brink of war, the Trade Alliance saw a chance to shift the balance of power in their favor. By secretly supplying the humans with advanced weapons and technology, they hoped to create a counterforce to the Kresnik's military might. However, this secret alliance was also playing a dangerous game. If the Kresnik or the Vare discovered their involvement, the consequences would be catastrophic. But the Trade Alliance was willing to take that risk, calculating that the galaxy's future would be shaped by whoever could control the flow of resources, and humanity's newfound power was a key factor in this. Back on Earth, the Federation was struggling to maintain control. President Sarah Klein had hoped that the galaxy would rally behind humanity's bold stance, but the reality of the situation was far darker than she had anticipated. The Kresnik were already preparing to strike, and the Vare were becoming more aggressive in their diplomatic efforts. The Federation was caught between two powerful forces, and, unknown to them, the shadowy movements of the Trade Alliance were only making the situation more precarious. Klein met with her closest advisors, her face hard with determination. We cannot afford to be reactive. We need to control the narrative before it spirals out of control. Her chief advisor, General David Winters, nodded. The Kresnik are coming for us, and we don't know how much time we have before they strike. The Vare are pushing for peace, but their true intentions are unclear. The Trade Alliance may be our only hope, But even as the Federation worked to prepare for the worst, they were unaware of the most dangerous force at play, the one orchestrating events behind the scenes. The human exiles, led by Marcus Orloff, had their own plan. They were preparing to take control of the galaxy's future, and they would not stop until humanity stood at the top, unchallenged and unstoppable. The galaxy was on the brink of war, a war that threatened to tear apart the fragile peace that had been carefully crafted over centuries. But as the Kresnik and the Vare positioned their fleets for battle, as the trade alliance subtly maneuvered behind the scenes, and as humanity's position became more precarious by the day, there was one truth that none of them could ignore. The time for diplomacy had passed, and now the galaxy was about to witness something unprecedented, a new dawn for humanity. The Federation, once caught between the overwhelming forces of the galaxy's largest factions, had begun to realize something. Humanity was not simply a participant in the grand scheme of things. They were not a race to be controlled, subjugated, or manipulated. The human delegation had made a bold choice, one that had caused chaos in the galaxy, but it was also a decision that would lead to a revelation that no one could have predicted. As President Sarah Klein sat in her war room, watching the reports flood in from every corner of human-controlled space, a quiet realization settled in her mind. The Federation had not been weak. They had been playing a game with rules that no longer applied. The galaxy's powers had long depended on the notion that humanity could be ignored, that they could be pushed aside for the sake of galactic unity. But humanity had made it clear. They would not be ignored anymore. Klein had hoped for peace, but peace, as it turned out, was an illusion. Peace had always been an arrangement made to benefit the powerful, the elite, and those who could control the flow of resources. Humanity had been a pawn in this game for too long, but now, they were ready to take control. "I know what we have to do," President Klein said, her voice firm as she addressed her advisors. "It's time we end this. We will not fight for a seat at the table anymore. We'll create our own table." On the desolate moon of Thaurin, Marcus Orloff, the leader of the secret faction of human exiles, watched the events unfold with a growing sense of satisfaction. His plan was coming to fruition. The Kresnik had acted rashly, and now they were preparing to strike at humanity's most vulnerable colonies. But what the Kresnik didn't know was that humanity's response would not come from a weakened federation. It would come from a force they had underestimated. Orloff had spent years cultivating an underground movement, gathering supporters who shared his vision of a galaxy where humanity would no longer be shackled by the old order. Now, with the Kresnik preparing for their assault, Orloff and his allies had already mobilized. They had the weapons, the intelligence, and, most importantly, the determination to make sure that humanity would not fall into the hands of alien powers. "What happens next will change the galaxy forever," Orloff muttered, as he looked over the data streams coming in from the outer rim. "Humanity is about to prove that we are more than just pawns." The first phase of their plan was simple: harness the power of surprise. As the Kresnik fleets advanced toward the human colonies, Orloff's operatives had already launched a series of coordinated attacks on key Kresnik military positions. These were not large-scale assaults, but rather precision strikes that disrupted the Kresnik's ability to mount an effective attack. The Kresnik, overconfident and arrogant, had underestimated humanity's capacity to fight back. The second phase, however, was the game-changer. While the Kresnik were reeling from these surprise attacks, the human exiles had secretly deployed a new weapon, one that had been developed in the shadows, hidden from the eyes of the Federation. It was a piece of technology capable of shutting down entire fleets of warships, effectively neutralizing the Kresnik's greatest strength. This weapon, a quantum disruptor, was unlike anything the galaxy had ever seen. As the Kresnik fleet approached, ready to unleash hell on the human colonies, they found themselves suddenly paralyzed. Their warships, once bristling with firepower, were rendered powerless. Engines sputtered to a halt, weapons systems went dark, and communications fell silent. The Kresnik were stranded in space, their ships floating helplessly as the human exiles descended like shadows from the dark. Meanwhile, across the galaxy, the Ver High Council had been closely monitoring the developments. Elian, the High Elder, had felt a growing unease ever since humanity's shocking decision. She had believed that humanity's actions were a response to the galaxy's corruption, but now it was clear that humanity was playing a much larger game. She and the other Ver leaders had long held the belief that they were the guardians of peace, the ones who could calm the storm and unite the galaxy. But now, they were faced with a challenge they hadn't anticipated. Humanity, the species they had once believed to be meek, was proving that they could shape their own destiny. Elian's energy flickered as she spoke to the other High Council members. The humans are not only surviving, they are thriving. This is not the same humanity we once knew. This is something entirely new. Another council member, a Ver named Kalen, nodded gravely. The humans have evolved, and they are no longer afraid of us or anyone else. It seems they found a way to push us into a corner. Elian sighed, her form growing dim in the dim light of the council chamber. Perhaps in their defiance, humanity has done what none of us could, expose the flaws in our ways. But what are we to do now? The galaxy is unraveling, and we stand in the center of it all. We must adapt, Kalen said firmly. We have always believed in peace, but we cannot ignore the reality that humanity's actions have changed the balance of power. It is time for us to reconsider our approach. The Ver had always prided themselves on their ability to adapt to changing circumstances, but they could no longer deny the truth. Humanity was no longer a side player in the galactic drama. They were the ones writing the script. Back on Earth, the Federation was preparing to make its move. President Klein addressed the people of the Federation in a broadcast that would go down in history. She spoke not just as a leader, but as the representative of a new era for humanity, a time when the human race would no longer be defined by its past mistakes or its dependence on others. My fellow citizens, she began, her voice strong and unwavering. The galaxy has underestimated us for far too long. We have been treated as pawns in a game played by the powerful, but no longer. We will no longer be dictated to by forces that do not understand our true nature. The galaxy's greatest powers, the Kresnik, the Ver, and the Trade Alliance, had underestimated humanity's resolve, but they were about to learn a lesson they would never forget. We will not surrender, President Klein continued. We will not bend to the will of the powerful. Humanity is here to stay. We are not just fighting for survival. We are fighting for the future of our people, and for a galaxy where peace is not a privilege, but a right. As the broadcast spread across the Federation, a wave of support surged through the ranks of humanity. Citizens, soldiers, and diplomats alike were united in their belief that humanity's future would no longer be decided by others. The time had come for the galaxy to acknowledge the strength of humanity, not just as a species, but as a force capable of changing the very fabric of the galaxy. The ultimate revelation came when the Kresnik, crippled by the surprise attacks and the quantum disruptor, were forced to retreat. Their warships limped back to their homeworld, their once proud fleet reduced to nothing more than floating wreckage. The galaxy had watched in awe as humanity, once seen as weak, had proven itself to be more than capable of holding its own. And then, as the Kresnik retreated, the Ver made their move. They, too, saw the writing on the wall, and chose not to continue their neutral stance. They declared their support for humanity's vision of a new galaxy, one where the powerful would no longer control the weak. The Ver's intervention brought an unexpected wave of support from many other factions, and soon the tide had turned. The Trade Alliance, once a shadowy player in the background, shifted its allegiance as well, seeing the value in an alliance with a rising power. They had long controlled the flow of resources, but now they saw humanity as the key to reshaping the galactic economy. With the Kresnik in retreat and the galaxy's other powers aligning with humanity, a new era began. The galaxy was no longer divided by the old lines of power. Humanity had proven its strength, and in doing so, had created a new dawn, a dawn of unity, of strength, and of peace. This was just the beginning. The galaxy would never be the same again. Humanity had risen from the shadows to claim its place among the stars, not as a subjugated species, but as the dominant force in the galaxy. The new dawn had arrived.